He didn't ask questions. He didn't wait for an explanation. Elliot Crane, CEO of Pine Rest Regional Medical Center, walked straight into the emergency room on a Tuesday morning, grabbed the chart out of a nurse's hands, and slapped her across the face so hard the sound cracked through the entire department like a gunshot. Every monitor beeped. Every pair of hands stopped moving. And the nurse, Sierra Quinn, 29 years old, 5'6", quiet as a church on a Monday, simply pressed 2 fingers to her cheek, looked him dead in the eye, and said nothing. She didn't cry. She didn't step back. She just looked at him the way a mountain looks at wind. If you've ever seen someone absorb something that would have destroyed another person and not even blink, you know exactly what the room felt like in that moment. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, please subscribe to our channel and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the beginning because you need to understand exactly who Sierra Quinn is before you understand what happened next. Pine Rest Regional Medical Center was the kind of hospital that ran on reputation and barely enough staff. It sat in the middle of a mid-sized city that had seen better economic days, serving everyone from uninsured factory workers to the occasional wealthy patient who wandered in from the suburbs when the traffic to the private clinic was too bad. The emergency room in particular was its beating heart, loud, relentless, and completely unforgiving. Nurses there didn't last long unless they were built for it. The ones who survived more than 2 years had a particular quality that was hard to name. It wasn't toughness exactly. It was more like density, like they had packed something heavy into themselves that kept them from being blown around by the chaos. Sierra Quinn was the densest person in that building, and almost no one knew why. She had been at Pine Rest for 3 years when all of this happened, which made her one of the veterans in a department that chewed through people. She worked the day shift primarily, sometimes picking up nights when they were short-staffed, which was often. She was certified in trauma care, advanced cardiac life support, and 3 other specializations that most nurses her age hadn't bothered to pursue. She did her work without commentary. She answered questions from newer nurses with patience that seemed almost unnatural. She never raised her voice. She never complained about the overtime, never rolled her eyes at difficult patients, never joined the huddle by the supply closet where the rest of the staff vented about management. They called her the quiet nurse, and they meant it as a neutral observation rather than a compliment, though over time it had drifted towards something like respect. You noticed Sierra the way you noticed a well-built wall, not dramatically but dependably. She was always exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what needed to be done at precisely the right moment. What no one at Pine Rest Regional knew, what Sierra had never told a single colleague, never mentioned in her hiring interview, never referenced in any conversation over 3 years, was that before she had been a nurse, she had been a soldier. Not just any soldier. Major Sierra Quinn, United States Marine Corps, had served 2 tours in active combat zones before medically cross-training into field medicine, eventually leading a forward operating surgical team through conditions that would have made most emergency rooms look peaceful. She had treated wounds under fire. She had made triage decisions with no equipment and no backup. She had carried injured men twice her size across terrain that had no business being walked across by anyone. She had done all of this before she was 26 years old. She left the military with a medical discharge after an injury that she never discussed, enrolled in a civilian nursing program that practically bored her to tears, with its pace passed every licensure exam on the first attempt with scores in the 98th percentile, and showed up at Pine Rest Regional as if none of the previous decade of her life had happened. She was starting over. She had her reasons, and they were her own. Nobody at that hospital knew any of this, and Sierra preferred it that way. The morning everything changed started the way most mornings at Pine Rest started, with chaos that had been quietly building since the overnight shift and was now cresting like a wave by 7:45. There were 4 patients in critical or near critical condition, 2 of whom had arrived within the same 20-minute window. There was a code that had been called and resolved, leaving the team slightly frayed around the edges. There was a new resident who had made a charting error that nobody had caught yet. And there was the VI patient in Bay 12, a city councilman named Douglas Mercer, who had been admitted the previous evening with chest pain and was now stable but agitated, demanding special treatment at every opportunity and mentioning his connection to the hospital board approximately once every 40 minutes. Sierra was at the central nursing station reviewing charts when her colleague, Dana Reyes, leaned over and said quietly, "Mercer's chart got flagged. Someone noted a medication discrepancy. Attending signed off on it, but the documentation doesn't match the order." Sierra looked at the chart. Who entered the order? Resident, Dr. Lim. He's already corrected it in the system, but the paper copy still shows the original entry. Which attending signed? Dr. Okafor. But he didn't catch that the paper and the system were different. Sierra set the chart down. Okay, Pull the paper copy, cross-reference it with the updated system entry, and flag it for Dr. Okafor to countersign. Standard discrepancy protocol. I already started that, Dana said. I just wanted you to know. Good, Sierra said. Where are we on the chest pain in Bay 3? They moved on. The discrepancy was a minor administrative issue, the kind that happened dozens of times a week in a department this size caught and corrected before it became anything more. Sierra had already mentally filed it under resolved and moved to the next priority, which is why she was completely unprepared for what walked through the ER doors 40 minutes later. She heard him before she saw him, not because he was loud, though he was loud. It was the quality of the sound, that particular kind of voice that had never in its life been told to lower itself. A voice that expected rooms to reorganize themselves around it. Elliot Crane, CEO of Pinarest Regional Medical Center, was 47 years old, 6 feet tall, and had the bearing of a man who had confused administrative authority for something much larger. He wore suits that cost more than most of his nurses made in a month. He had been recruited from a private hospital group 2 years ago to modernize the institution, which in practice had meant cutting staff ratios, rebranding the lobby, and demanding that every department submit performance metrics on a weekly basis. He did not visit the emergency room often. When he did, it was never good. He came through the doors with his executive assistant half running to keep up, and his face already arranged in the expression of a man preparing to be disappointed. He was holding a printed document, something from the chart Sierra realized as he got closer. The VIP chart. Someone had sent it upstairs. Someone had escalated the discrepancy before Dana's correction process was complete. Who is the charge nurse on this floor? Crane demanded, not to anyone in particular, just to the general air of the department, as if the room itself owed him an answer. The resident at the nearest workstation looked up, startled. A patient in one of the nearby bays shifted behind their curtain. Dana Reyes took a small, instinctive step backward. Sierra set down what she was holding and turned around. I'm the senior nurse on this shift. Can I help you? Crane's eyes landed on her with the energy of someone who had expected a larger target. He looked at her name badge. He looked at her face. He held up the printed chart. There is a medication discrepancy in the chart of a board-connected patient, he said. I want to know who is responsible for this. I want to know why it wasn't caught before it reached my desk, and I want to know right now. Sierra's voice didn't change at all. The discrepancy was identified this morning by nursing staff. The attending physician has been notified, and the chart is being corrected through standard protocol. The patient was never administered the incorrect medication. There was no adverse event. That is not the point, Crane said. I understand that, Sierra said. But I want you to have the complete picture before we continue this conversation. The word continue seemed to irritate him, as if the conversation was something she was presuming to have a role in rather than something she was the subject of. He took a step closer to the nursing station. The assistant behind him had stopped writing. Who entered the original order? A resident physician. Name. I'm not going to give you a resident's name in the middle of the ER floor, Mr. Crane. Her voice was still steady. If you want to review the incident through proper channels, we can do that. Dr. Okafor is the attending of record. He's available to speak with you. Something shifted in Crane's face. It wasn't anger exactly. It was more like the recognition of resistance and his body's immediate rejection of it. He was not accustomed to being redirected, certainly not by someone who didn't seem to need anything from him and didn't seem afraid of anything he represented. You're telling me, he said slowly, that a chart error involving Councilman Mercer was identified this morning, and your response was to run a quiet correction process without escalating to administration. That is the correct protocol for a documentation discrepancy with no patient impact. I decide what the correct protocol is. With respect, Sierra said, the clinical protocol was written by the medical executive committee, not by your office. The room had gone very still. The kind of still that happens, not because nothing is occurring, but because every single person in the vicinity is holding themselves motionless, trying not to draw attention to the fact that they are witnessing something they cannot look away from. Dana Reyes, standing 6 feet from Sierra, later said that she had thought in that moment, she had genuinely thought that Sierra was about to get fired. She had thought this woman is going to lose her job before 9 in the morning. Because nobody talked to Crane like that. Not even the attendings who outranked him medically and knew it. Nobody told Crane what his office did or didn't govern. Not if they wanted to stay employed. Dana had not yet considered the possibility that Crane would do what he did next. He was not a man who processed the word respect as a prelude to anything he was obligated to receive. He processed it as condescension wrapped in deference, which was somehow worse. He processed Sierra's calm as a challenge, her stillness as insubordination dressed up in professionalism. And he had spent his entire career in positions where he had never once been required to tolerate that. His hand moved before most people in the room even registered that he had raised it. The slap landed against Sierra's left cheek with a sound that had no business existing in a medical facility. It wasn't a shove, wasn't a graze. It was a full, deliberate, open-handed strike. Hard enough to turn her head. Hard enough that the air it displaced reached the nurses 3 feet away. And then there was silence, so complete that the monitors sounded like they were screaming. Sierra's head had turned with the force of it. Slowly, with the measured quality of someone who had made a decision about how to move, she turned it back. Her eyes found Crane's face. Her right hand came up, 2 fingers pressed gently to her cheek, and she held them there for just a moment, not dramatically, not for effect, just checking. The way you check a wound to understand what you're dealing with before you decide how to respond. Her expression did not change. Not the slight furrow of outrage, not the trembling chin of someone on the edge of tears, not the widened eyes of shock. Nothing. She looked at him the way she had once looked at a sandstorm in the distance, with complete clarity about what it was and complete calm about the fact that it was not going to move her. Donna later said she thought she might faint, not from the slap, but from what came after it, which was Sierra Quinn simply lowering her hand, turning back to the chart she had been reviewing, and saying to the resident standing nearby, "Get Dr. Okafor on the line. Tell him Mr. Crane would like to speak with him directly about the Mercer chart." The resident didn't move for 2 full seconds. He was staring. "Now please," Sierra said without looking up. Crane had not moved. His hand was still slightly extended, as if it had not yet received the message from his brain that the action was complete. He had expected something. He wasn't sure what. Tears, maybe. Collapse. Some visible confirmation that he had established the hierarchy correctly. What he had not expected was to be functionally ignored. "You," he said. His voice had a strange quality to it now, like a machine that had thrown a gear. "You are done. You are finished in this building. You will go home right now." Sierra looked up from the chart. "I have a patient in Bay 3 who needs a medication review before his cardiologist arrives at 9:15. I'll be happy to discuss anything you need to discuss after that." "You are not hearing me." "I'm hearing you fine," she said. "I'm choosing to finish my work first." The new resident, Marcus Webb, 26 years old, 4 months into his first hospital rotation, was standing close enough to Sierra that he could see her hands. He told the story many times afterward to anyone who would listen. He said her hands were completely steady, not gripping the chart hard, not trembling at the edges, steady. The way you'd expect someone to hold a chart when nothing unusual was happening. As if the most powerful man in the building had not just struck her across the face in front of 30 people and told her she was fired. He said it was the most frightening and the most impressive thing he had ever seen in the same moment. Crane was still standing at the nursing station. His assistant had stepped back another full pace and was looking at the floor. Around the department, the staff had not resumed their work. They were in that particular suspended state of people who are professionally required to be somewhere but cannot process what they are seeing well enough to pretend it isn't happening. "Security," Crane said to his assistant, not loudly. "Get security down here." "Mr. Crane," his assistant started. "Security, now!" Dana moved to Sierra's side. Not dramatically, not making a statement. She just moved closer the way people move towards something they don't want to leave standing alone. 2 other nurses, without speaking or looking at each other, took small steps in the same direction. The attending resident looked between Crane and Sierra and seemed to decide something because he straightened his posture and stayed where he was instead of retreating. "You think this is a standoff," Crane said to Sierra. He had lowered his voice now, which somehow made it worse. "You think I won't have you removed from this building?" "I think," Sierra said, still looking at the chart, "that the patient in Bay 3 has a potassium level loss that needs to be addressed before his cardiologist reviews his pre-procedure panel. I think that matters more than this conversation. I also think you should speak with your legal team before you say anything else this morning." The last sentence landed differently than everything before it. It had no anger in it, no threat. It was delivered with the same flat informational quality as everything else she'd said. But everyone in earshot heard it, and everyone understood that it was not a suggestion. It was a marker. She was placing a marker on the moment the way you'd place a flag on a map. This is where it started. This is the point from which everything else will be measured. Crane heard it too. Something moved across his face that hadn't been there before. Not regret, not yet, but the first faint shadow of something that might eventually become it. He had struck a hospital employee in front of 30 witnesses, in the emergency room on a floor with active cameras. His assistant had gone very still. "This is not over," Crane said. "No," Sierra agreed quietly. "It isn't." He left. Not gracefully, he turned and walked toward the exit with the energy of a man who needed to be somewhere else. Immediately, his assistant falling in behind him with the expression of someone who already knew they were going to spend the rest of the day on the phone with lawyers. The double doors swung behind him. For a moment, nobody in the ER moved. Then Sierra set down the chart, picked up the phone at the nursing station, and paged Dr. Okafor. Dr. Okafor, this is Quinn in the ER. We have a documentation issue on the Mercer chart that needs your counter signature, and we're going to need to loop in patient safety. Yes now, thank you. She hung up. She picked up the chart for Bay 3. She walked toward the bay. Dana caught up to her in 3 steps. Sierra. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Sierra, what just happened? Are you okay? He hit you. In front of everyone. Sierra glanced at her. For just a moment, something moved behind her eyes. Not pain, not fear. Something older and quieter than either of those things. Something that had been places where what had just happened in this ER would have barely registered on the scale of what was possible. I'm fine, she said. You're fine, Dana repeated. The patient in 3 needs me. Sierra, you should call HR. You should file, they have to. Dana. She stopped walking. She turned and looked at her colleague, and whatever was in her expression made Dana stop talking immediately. I know exactly what I need to do. I have been in rooms that were much louder than this one, dealing with people who had more than their hand to threaten me with. I promise you I am fine. What I need right now is for you to pull the updated Mercer chart and have it ready for patient safety, and for Marcus to check the potassium protocol for the patient in 3. She paused. Can you do that? Dana stared at her. Who are you? She said, and she meant it as a genuine question. Sierra Quinn almost smiled. I'm the nurse on this shift, she said. Let's get back to work. And she walked into Bay 3 chart in hand, steady as a wall, and behind her slowly, one by one, the staff of the emergency room at Pinarest Regional Medical Center came back to life and went back to their work. But not one of them forgot what they had just seen. Not one of them would ever fully answer the question that Dana had asked out loud, the one they were all now carrying quietly with them through the rest of that morning. Who was Sierra Quinn really? By noon, they were all starting to feel the particular itching certainty that whatever the answer was, it was going to be something none of them had imagined. By noon, the story of what Elliot Crane had done in the emergency room that morning had traveled through every floor of Pinarest Regional Medical Center. Not through any official announcement, not through any formal report. Hospitals have their own nervous system, a web of text messages and break room conversations and overheard hallway exchanges that can carry information from the basement loading dock to the 7th floor executive suite in under 40 minutes. And what had happened in the ER that morning was the kind of information that moved fast because it was the kind of information that people couldn't hold still inside themselves. The version that traveled was remarkably consistent, which said something about how clearly it had registered. Elliot Crane had struck a nurse in the emergency room, in front of the staff, on camera, and the nurse had not moved. She had not cried, had not begged, had not fled to the bathroom. She had pressed 2 fingers to her cheek, looked at the man who had hit her, and then gone back to work as if nothing had interrupted her morning. That last part was the part people kept getting stuck on. The not moving part. The going back to work part. On the 3rd floor, a surgical nurse named Patricia Hollis, 22 years at Pinarest, heard the story from an orderly and said she didn't even flinch. And when the orderly confirmed that no, she had not flinched, Patricia sat down on the nearest chair and said, Lord, who is that woman? In the radiology department, 2 technicians debated whether Sierra would file a report and were interrupted by a 3rd colleague who said, You're asking the wrong question. The question is why she didn't look scared. Nobody gets slapped by Crane and doesn't look scared. Nobody had an answer to that. On the 6th floor in the administrative wing, Crane's assistant was behind a closed office door. She had been on the phone continuously since they left the ER, and her voice, when audible through the glass, had the particular tight quality of someone managing a situation that had moved well past manageable. And in the emergency room, Sierra Quinn was on her 4th consecutive hour of work since the incident, moving through the department with the same measured efficiency she always carried, and the staff around her kept having the same experience. The experience of watching her and waiting for some crack to appear, some sign that the morning had affected her, and finding nothing. Not performance, not suppression, exactly. Just nothing. Solid ground. At 12:17, Dana found her at the medication station and said in a low voice, HR called. They want you in at 2. I know, Sierra said. I already called them. Dana blinked. You called HR. Before Crane got back to his office. I documented the incident, listed the witnesses, and requested a formal inquiry. She checked the medication label twice before continuing. I also called patient advocacy and left a message for the chief medical officer. Dana stared at her. When did you do all of this? Between Bay 3 and the code in Bay 7. There was a code in Bay 7. Resolved. Patient is stable. Sierra capped the medication and turned to face Dana fully. I want you to know that you're going to be asked to give a statement. So will Marcus and the other staff who were present. You don't have to say anything you are not comfortable saying, but I want you to tell the truth about what you saw. Exactly what you saw. No softening it. Dana's expression did something complicated. You sound like you've done this before. Sierra's eyes held steady. Tell the truth about what you saw, Dana. That's all I'm asking. She picked up the next chart and walked away, and Dana stood there for a moment, feeling the strange sensation of having had a conversation that told her everything and nothing at the same time. Down the hall, Marcus Webb was not doing nearly as well. He was 26 years old and had been in medicine long enough to know that what he had witnessed that morning was serious and not long enough to know what to do with what he'd felt watching it. He had seen Sierra move through the rest of the morning like a machine built specifically for mornings like this one, and he had felt something that wasn't quite awe and wasn't quite fear, but was somewhere in the territory between them. He was sitting at a workstation when his attending Dr. Okafor sat down next to him and said quietly, "You doing all right, Marcus?" Marcus looked at him. "I don't know what I am." Is that a normal answer? For today, yes. Dr. Okafor glanced across the department toward where Sierra was. She told you to stay on the floor. She told me to check the potassium protocol. Marcus shook his head slightly. After it happened, she just turned around and assigned me a task. Like I was going to fall apart and she was building me a handhold. Dr. Okafor was quiet for a moment. She's done that before. Not with something like this, but the way she manages case. Oh, she read people before she reads situations. He paused. I've been here 11 years. I've worked with a lot of nurses. Sierra Quinn is not like any nurse I've worked with. Who is she? Marcus said. Dr. Okafor shook his head. I don't know. I've never known. But I've always had the feeling there was a significant answer to that question. On the other side of the building, Elliot Crane was in his office, and the meeting he was in had the energy of a room where everyone present understood that something had gone irreversibly wrong, and nobody wanted to be the first to say so. His chief operating officer, a careful man named Robert Ewan, had reviewed the security camera footage twice before coming upstairs. He had not said much since arriving. His lawyer was on speakerphone. His lawyer had been saying things in the measured, deliberately neutral tone that lawyers used when they were trying to prevent their clients from understanding how bad the situation actually was. The camera angle captures the event clearly, the lawyer was saying. I understand that, Crane said. I want to make sure you understand what I mean by clearly. There is no angle issue. There is no ambiguity about what the footage shows. I was reacting to a serious breach in patient safety protocol. Elliot, his lawyer's voice shifted, losing the neutrality. Stop. Don't finish that sentence. Don't say anything that could be construed as a justification, because there is no legal framework in which what you are describing constitutes a justifiable response to an administrative error. A pause. Now, has the employee filed a complaint? Not that I've been informed, Robert Ewan spoke for the first time since sitting down. HR received a call from Quinn at approximately 9:47 this morning. She had already documented the incident and listed every witness by name. He set a piece of paper on the desk. She also contacted the CMO's office. Crane looked at the paper. He looked at it for a long time without picking it up. She called HR, he said slowly, before I got back to this floor. Before you got back to this floor, Robert confirmed. Something shifted in the room, because that detail changed the shape of the morning. It meant that what the staff had read as Sierra Quinn going back to work, going back to normal, shaking it off, it hadn't been any of those things. She had been moving on a parallel track the entire time, handling the clinical floor with one hand and building a formal record with the other, calm and methodical and completely invisible about it. She hadn't been absorbing the blow. She had been responding to it in a language that Crane didn't speak fluently enough to recognize when he was hearing it. The lawyer asked for a copy of the footage and said he would call back within the hour. Crane sat at his desk after the call ended, and Robert had left, and he sat there long enough for his assistant to come in twice to ask if he needed anything and leave both times without an answer. He kept thinking about her face, the complete absence of fear in it. It nagged at him in a way he couldn't organize into useful thought, because fear was the mechanism. Fear was what kept hierarchy functional. You struck someone at that level. Not that he had intended, but when that kind of display of power happened in that kind of space, fear was what followed. It always followed. It was the point. And she had looked at him like he was a weather system, like he was interesting and temporary and not something she needed to manage emotionally, because she had already decided it wouldn't be moving her anywhere she didn't choose to go. He picked up the phone and called the head of security. Pull everything you have on Sierra Quinn. Hire, date, background check, prior employment references. All of it. Is there something specific you are looking for? I don't know yet, Crane said. That's the problem. Back in the ER, 2 o'clock came, and Sierra handed off to the incoming shift nurse with a report so thorough and organized that the incoming nurse, a veteran named Gloria Chen, paused halfway through and said, "This is the most complete handoff report I've seen in a year." "There's a lot of moving pieces today," Sierra said simply. Gloria looked at her steadily. "I heard about this morning. Most people have." "Are you all right?" Sierra met her eyes. "I'm going to go talk to HR now." "That's not what I asked." Something in Sierra's expression shifted very slightly, the way a building settles almost imperceptibly under a change in pressure. "I'm all right," she said. "I've been hit harder, in worse places, by people with more resources than Elliot Crane." She said it so simply that it took Gloria a full beat to process the weight of what it might mean. By the time she had, Sierra was already walking down the hall toward the elevator, white sneakers, quiet on the floor posture, as straight and settled as it had been at 7 in the morning before any of this had started. The HR meeting lasted 45 minutes. The HR director, a woman named Sandra Cho, had conducted many difficult meetings in her career, but she said later to a colleague that this one had an unusual quality to it. The usual power dynamic of these conversations, where HR held information and the employee navigated uncertainty, had not been present. Sierra had arrived with documentation already organized, a clear and factual account of the morning delivered without any of the emotional loading that would have made it easier to question or minimize, in a specific set of requests that she laid out one by one as if she were presenting a clinical plan. She wanted the incident formally logged as workplace assault. She wanted the security footage preserved. She wanted statements collected from all present witnesses within 48 hours before memories softened or pressure was applied. She wanted the patient advocacy office notified because there was a possible connection to the patient whose chart had been the stated reason for Crane's presence in the ER, and that patient's well-being was also a matter of record. And she wanted a formal response from administration within 72 hours. Sandra wrote everything down. "Ms. Quinn," she said carefully when Sierra finished, "I want to be transparent with you. Given Mr. Crane's position, this process may involve the board and the timeline. The timeline I've outlined is what the hospital's own policy specifies for documented workplace violence incidents," Sierra said. "I've read it. I'm simply asking you to follow it." Sandra Cho looked at her for a long moment. "Have you considered retaining a personal attorney?" "Yes," Sierra said. "That's it's in motion." Sandra set her pen down. "Ms. Quinn, can I ask you something off the record?" Sierra's expression was neutral and patient. "You can ask." "How are you this calm?" The pause that followed was not uncomfortable, but it had weight. Sierra looked at the table for just a moment, and Sandra had the distinct impression that something large and complex was moving behind the surface of her composure, something that was real and not performed. Then Sierra looked up. "Because I've learned," she said quietly, "that panic is a resource. You spend it once and it's gone. I don't spend it unless I have to." She stood, collected her copies, and left. Dana was waiting for her near the elevator bank. She had stayed past her shift end, which Sierra noticed immediately, and which made her pause. "You didn't have to wait," Sierra said. "I know," Dana said. "I wanted to." She fell into step beside Sierra. "How did it go?" "As expected." "What does that mean?" "It means they took everything I gave them, and they're going to have to decide what to do with it, and that decision is going to be influenced by how much the board values Crane and how much they value not being the hospital that let a CEO assault a nurse on camera." She pressed the elevator button. "The footage is what matters. It always comes down to evidence." Dana was quiet for a moment. "Then Marcus asked me something today." Sierra glanced at her. "He asked who you really are." Dana said it carefully. "And I told him I didn't know. But Sierra, I've been here 2 years with you. And today I watched you take a hit that would have leveled me completely. And then I watched you spend the next 5 hours running this department and building a legal case simultaneously without missing a single patient care obligation." She stopped walking. "That's not something you learn in nursing school." The elevator arrived. Sierra stepped in. Dana stepped in after her. "No," Sierra said finally, "it's not." "So who are you?" The elevator doors closed. Sierra looked straight ahead, and in the metal surface of the doors, Dana could see a faint reflection of both of them. Sierra straight and still, Dana watching her with the expression of someone standing on the edge of something large. "I'm the nurse who was on shift today," Sierra said. "That's what matters right now." Dana let it go, but she filed it. She filed it in the specific drawer in her memory that fills with things that feel like incomplete sentences, answers that are real but not whole truths that are being held at a slight distance until the moment is right. That moment came sooner than any of them expected. At 4:17 that afternoon, Sierra's phone rang. She was in the parking structure, about to get into her car. The number was not one she recognized. She answered on the second ring. The voice on the other end was male mid-50s with the particular cadence of someone who had spent decades giving orders in environments where the orders needed to be understood clearly the first time. Major Quinn, Sierra's hand tightened on the phone, just slightly, just enough that she noticed it. She hadn't been called that in 3 years. This is she said, and her own voice had shifted a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in register. Something had come online that was usually set to standby. This is General David Hartwell. I believe you'll know that name. She did. Yes, sir. We're aware of what happened at your facility today. I want you to know that directly. A pause. We're also aware that it wasn't the most significant thing that happened this week from our perspective. Something has come to our attention that we need to discuss with you in person. Sierra leaned against her car. She looked at the concrete above her, the low ceiling of the structure, the ordinary afternoon light. I'm listening. We'd rather not do this over the phone. We have personnel in your region. Can you be available tomorrow morning? I have a shift at 7. This would be before your shift. She was quiet for a moment. 3 years. 3 years of ordinary days, ordinary shifts, the comfortable weight of a life that had been deliberately chosen for its steadiness. And now her name in the mouth of a man who lived in a world she had walked away from, his voice calm and assuming, across a connection that had found her number without her giving it. How did you get this number? She asked. We've always had it, General Hartwell said simply. And that simple sentence, those 4 words contained inside them, a piece of information that rearranged the landscape of the last 3 years in a way Sierra hadn't fully prepared for, even though some part of her, some quiet, watchful part that never fully stood down, had always known it was possible. What time? She said. 5:30. There'll be a car. She stood in the parking structure for a long time after the call ended. Long enough that the automatic light above her cycled off and she was standing in dimmer light before she moved. She looked at her phone. She thought about Dana's question in the elevator. She thought about Marcus and his 26-year-old eyes trying to process something they hadn't been given the tools for. She thought about Elliot Crane's face the moment he realized that striking her hadn't done what he'd expected it to do. She thought about what she had told Sandra Cho. That panic was a resource, that she only spent it when she had to. She hadn't had to yet today. She unlocked her car, got in, and drove home. She ate dinner. She set her alarm for 4:45. She did not call anyone. She did not search for General Hartwell's name online because she already knew everything she needed to know about him and what his call meant. She did not lie awake wondering what was coming. She slept the way she had learned to sleep in conditions where rest was a tactical decision, completely efficiently and without wasting the dark on things she couldn't control. Because she already knew in the bones-deep way of someone who has spent years moving through the world with their eyes fully open that tomorrow was going to change everything. Not for her. She had already changed years ago in places that had no names on maps that civilians ever read. For everyone else. For Dana and Marcus and Gloria and the board of Pinterest Regional Medical Center. For Elliot Crane, who had struck a woman this morning and spent the rest of the day constructing a story about why he'd been justified, a story that was going to meet its end very soon in a way he had no capacity to anticipate. Because Major Sierra Quinn, decorated combat veteran, former field surgical team commander, recipient of 2 commendations that were classified and one that was not, had been found. And the people who had found her were not the kind of people whose arrival at a place was neutral. When generals moved, everything around them shifted. That was the nature of what they were. And they were already on their way. The car arrived at 4:52, 13 minutes before Sierra had expected it, and she was already standing at her front door when the headlights swept across the driveway. That was the thing about old habits. They didn't ask permission to come back. She had woken at 4:30 without the alarm, dressed in the dark by memory, and eaten half a piece of toast standing at the kitchen counter, the way she had eaten 1,000 breakfasts in conditions where sitting down was a luxury. Her body had remembered before her mind fully caught up. It knew what the phone call from General Hartwell meant, even if the rest of her was still working through it. The driver was young, uniformed, and said nothing beyond Major Quinn when she opened the door. She got in. They drove. The city was dark and mostly quiet at that hour, the kind of pre-dawn stillness that belonged to delivery drivers and hospital workers and people whose lives ran on a different clock than the rest of the world. Sierra watched it pass outside the window and thought about the last time she had ridden in a government vehicle before sunrise. She thought about who had been sitting beside her then and what they had been driving toward, and she pulled herself back from that particular hallway in her memory because it didn't help anything to walk down it right now. They pulled into the parking lot of a hotel near the interstate, not the city's best, not its worst. The kind of neutral ground that said this meeting wasn't meant to be impressive, it was meant to be private. The driver led her to a conference room on the 2nd floor. He knocked twice and opened the door. There were 3 of them, Sierra had known from General Hartwell's call that there would be military presence. She had not known there would be 3 generals. She stood in the doorway for exactly 1 second, long enough to read the room and count the stars on the shoulders and understand that whatever this meeting was about, it was not a casual check-in. Then she stepped inside and the driver closed the door behind her. General David Hartwell was on his feet first. He was 61, silver-haired, with the particular physical presence of a man who had never in his adult life forgotten where all the exits in a room were. He extended his hand. "Major Quinn, thank you for coming." "General Hartwell." She shook it. The second general she recognized from photographs she had not looked at in 3 years, Brigadier General Louise Carver, the first woman to command a forward logistics battalion in the branch, someone whose name Sierra had heard spoken with a specific kind of respect that was different from ordinary military respect. Carver nodded at her sharp and clean. "Quinn." "General Carver." The third she didn't recognize immediately, and he introduced himself before she had to navigate that. "Major General Thomas Reeves. I was brought in from Washington specifically for this conversation." "Washington." Sierra sat down when they gestured for her to, and she noted the word and set it aside to examine later. Hartwell got to it without preamble, which she appreciated. "You know we've been keeping an informal eye on you since your discharge." "I suspected," she said. "We want you to know that what happened at your hospital yesterday has been reviewed." He paused. "We want you to understand that our interest in what happened yesterday is not what brought us to the city." Sierra looked at him steadily. "Then what did—" Reeves leaned forward. He had a file on the table in front of him, and he didn't open it, which meant everything in it was already in his head. "3 weeks ago, a classified medical protocol that your former surgical team developed during your second tour was accessed by an unauthorized party. The protocol relates to field stabilization of traumatic brain injuries in low-resource combat environments. Your team's work on that protocol saved an estimated 47 lives before it was finalized and incorporated into training. It has never been declassified." He looked at her. "Somebody got into it. We don't know how yet. We're working that problem. But the reason it matters is that the protocol was developed largely from field notes and case documentation that you authored personally. Your name is attached to it in ways that the standard classification structure doesn't fully conceal." Sierra absorbed this. "You're saying someone who accessed that file has access to my identity?" "Potentially. Whoever accessed it was sophisticated. We don't know their intent yet." Reeves paused. "But given the security implications and given what happened at your facility yesterday, which became public record faster than we would have preferred, we felt it was important to make contact directly." The room was very quiet for a moment. Sierra looked at the table. She was running calculations, the kind that had nothing to do with numbers and everything to do with variables and probability and what each piece of information weighed against the others. "You think what happened with Crane could attract attention," she said, "if someone is already looking for me. A nurse who doesn't flinch when a CEO strikes her in a room full of witnesses," Carver said quietly, "and who then runs a textbook response process that looks less like a traumatized employee and more like someone who has managed hostile incidents in high-stakes environments before. That story is going to spread major. It already has. Your name is in 3 local news alerts this morning." Sierra closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds, then opened them. "What do you need from me?" "Right now, nothing. We want to brief you on the situation. We want to give you updated security contacts, and we want to assess your preference." Hartwell was careful with the word. "If you want to remain in your current position, we'll provide support in the background. If the exposure concerns you enough that you'd rather transition—" "I'm not leaving," Sierra said. The speed of it surprised even her, and she saw Carver's expression shift by a fraction in response. "I am not leaving Pinarest Regional." Hartwell studied her. "Can I ask why?" "Because the security calculus. Because I walked away from one life already." Her voice was even, but there was something underneath it now, something with genuine weight. "And I built another one. Carefully. 3 years, General. I know every patient who comes through that ER. I know who needs a softer voice and who needs directness and who is terrified and hiding it and who is in more pain than they're admitting to. I did not spend 3 years learning how to be in that place so I could disappear the moment it became inconvenient." She paused. "I'm not a flight risk. I never was. I left the Corps because my body made that decision, not my will." The work didn't end. It just changed addresses. The silence that followed had a different quality than the ones before it. Carver was looking at her with an expression that Sierra couldn't fully read, but that felt like recognition, the specific recognition of someone who has had a version of the same argument with themselves and made the same choice. "All right," Hartwell said finally. "Then here is what we're going to do." The briefing lasted 40 minutes. She left the hotel at 6:40 with a new number in her phone, a contact protocol she memorized and did not write down, and a clearer picture of the space she was now occupying, a woman standing at the intersection of a civilian life she had chosen and a military past that had never fully released its claim on her. She had known abstractly that this intersection existed. She had simply been choosing for 3 years not to stand at it directly. She arrived at Pine Arrest Regional at 6:58, 2 minutes before her shift, and the first person she saw was Marcus Webb, who was finishing overnight notes at the nursing station and looked up when she walked in with the expression of someone who had been rehearsing something to say. Quinn, he stood up. Morning, Marcus. I gave my statement to HR yesterday afternoon. He said it quickly, like he'd been holding it and needed to put it down. Everything I saw, I didn't soften anything. She looked at him, something in her expression warmed by a degree, not much, but enough to reach her eyes. Thank you. He stopped. Started again. I also want to say that I don't know what's going on with you or what happened yesterday entirely, and I understand that it's not mine to know. But I've been in this residency for 4 months, and I've learned more from watching you work than I've learned from any attending lecture, and I think what he did was, his voice caught for just a moment. He pushed through it. I think it was wrong, and I'm not going to pretend it wasn't because he's the CEO. Sierra was quiet for a moment. That'll cost you something, she said, in a place like this, being willing to say that about a man like Crane. Maybe, Marcus said, but it costs more not to. She looked at him for a beat longer. 26 years old, 4 months into the first hard chapter of his professional life, already making decisions based on what he could live with rather than what was safe. She recognized the quality. She had been looking for it without consciously naming it since the moment she'd walked into this ER 3 years ago. Go home and sleep, she said. You've got rounds at 3. He almost smiled. Yes, ma'am. He left and Sierra turned to the department, and the department was already in motion, the morning rhythm of handoffs and charts, and the particular smell of institutional coffee and antiseptic that she had come genuinely to think of as home. Dana arrived at 7:15 and found Sierra already in the middle of a case talking to a patient in Bay 4 with that careful, present quality of attention that made people feel seen in environments designed for throughput. Dana waited. When Sierra came out, she fell into step beside her and said in a low voice, "There's something you need to know." Sierra glanced at her. Tell me. Crane came in early this morning, like before 6. He was here with 2 men in suits, and they were on the executive floor for about an hour, and then they left. Dana paused. Gloria saw them when she was finishing overnight. She said he looked scared. Sierra nodded, processed it. Who were the men? Nobody she recognized. Not hospital staff. Lawyers, Sierra thought, or board representatives, or both. The footage had been reviewed. The math was being done in the administrative wing, and Elliot Crane was discovering that the morning he had decided to make a demonstration out of the quiet nurse had become the morning that was going to define his tenure in ways he couldn't control. Okay, Sierra said. Okay, Dana stared at her. That's all you, okay? What else would I say? I don't know, something like he's panicking. He's going to try to spin this. He's going to find a way to... He can try, Sierra said simply. The footage is preserved. The statements are filed. The witnesses are on record. She stopped walking and turned to face Dana. He can come in before 6 every morning for the next month. It doesn't change what the camera saw. Dana studied her. You're not worried at all. I didn't say that. What are you worried about? Sierra turned back toward the nursing station. Right now, I'm worried about the patient in Bay 6 who has an elevated troponin that the overnight notes don't adequately explain. Walk with me. Donna walked with her, because that was what you did with Sierra. You went where the work went, and the work always went somewhere real. The morning built the way ER mornings build, one thing at a time, until suddenly it was all the things at once, and the staff moved through it with the organized urgency that was their particular form of grace. Sierra was in the middle of a medication reconciliation for a patient with a complex cardiac history when the overhead PA crackled, and a voice that was not the standard administrative voice said, "Could nursing staff please note that administration has requested all department heads to the executive conference room at 10 o'clock. Dana caught Sierra's eye across the station. Sierra returned her attention to the chart. At 9:51, the charge nurse from the day shift, a veteran named Raymond Park, appeared at Sierra's shoulder. Quinn, they're asking for you specifically. Conference room, 10 o'clock. I'm in the middle of a reconciliation. I'll cover it, Raymond said. He was 60 years old and had covered things in this department that would have made most people retire. He said it the way he said everything, flat and certain and without negotiation. Sierra handed him the chart. Warfarin dosing needs verification against the new lab values. The attending signed off on the morning dose, but I want a second set of eyes on the afternoon. Got it. She walked to the elevator. She rode it to the 6th floor. She walked to the executive conference room and opened the door. The room held 7 people. Sandra Cho from HR, who nodded at her. 2 men she didn't recognize who had the bearing of attorneys. A woman in her 50s who introduced herself as Dr. Miriam Walsh, chair of the hospital board, and Sierra noted the chair, not a member of the chair, with the expression of someone who had driven to this building this morning with a specific purpose. Robert Ewan, the COO, who did not look at Sierra when she entered. And Elliot Crane. Crane was sitting at the far end of the table. He was immaculately dressed as always, but something in his posture had changed since the day before. He looked like a man who had spent the night in a room with facts he couldn't negotiate with. Sierra sat down. She did not choose the smallest chair or the one furthest from Crane. She sat directly across from Dr. Walsh, and she folded her hands on the table and she waited. Walsh spoke first. Ms. Quinn, thank you for coming up. I want to begin by saying that I have reviewed the security footage from yesterday morning in its entirety. She paused. I want you to hear directly from the board's leadership that what that footage shows is unambiguous, and that the board takes it with the full seriousness it deserves. Thank you, Sierra said. I also want you to know that we have been in contact with our legal representative since yesterday afternoon, and that the hospital's official position is not one of defense. She glanced at the attorneys who remained expressionless. We are here today to begin a conversation about how to address what happened appropriately and transparently. One of the attorneys cleared his throat and began to speak about process and protocol, and Sierra listened without interrupting, noting what was said and what was carefully not said. Crane sat at the end of the table throughout, and Sierra did not look at him often, but when she did, she found the same thing every time: a man who had entered the ER yesterday morning, carrying absolute certainty, and had watched it dissolve increment by increment, and had not yet fully processed what that meant for who he believed himself to be. Then the conference room door opened. The administrative assistant who opened it looked briefly panicked, the kind of panic that means something is happening that was not on the agenda. She said, I'm sorry to interrupt, Dr. Walsh, but there are military officers in the lobby. Walsh looked at her. I'm sorry. 3 of them, in uniform. The assistant's voice had the quality of someone delivering information they don't entirely believe. They've asked to come upstairs. They said they're here to see Ms. Quinn. Every head in the room turned towards Sierra. Sierra did not turn her head. She kept her eyes on Dr. Walsh, and her expression did not change at all. And that stillness, that absolute unwavering stillness in the middle of a room that had just shifted on its axis, was the moment that several people present would later identify as the instant they understood they had been operating with an incomplete picture. That every assumption they had made about Sierra Quinn, who she was, what she was, why she moved through the world the way she did, had been made with information that was fundamentally insufficient. Walsh said, please bring them up. The wait was under 2 minutes. It felt longer. No one in the room spoke. Crane's attorney whispered something in his ear that Crane didn't appear to register. Robert Ewan had finally looked up from the table and was watching the door with the careful expression of a man revising his mental model of the morning in real time. The door opened again. General David Hartwell entered first in full-dress uniform, and the oxygen in the room changed the way it changes when authority of a particular kind walks into a space. Behind him, Brigadier General Louise Carver, and then Major General Thomas Reeves, and the 3 of them arranged themselves inside the door with the natural, practiced economy of people who had walked into rooms that needed to feel their presence and knew exactly how to let it land. Hartwell's eyes went directly to Sierra, then to the room. He took in Crane at the end of the table, and the attorneys in the board chair, and he came to whatever conclusion he needed to come to in approximately 3 seconds. Good morning, he said. His voice was unhurried. I'm General David Hartwell, United States Marine Corps. My colleagues are General Carver and General Reeves. He didn't reach for a chair. He didn't present credentials. He simply stood there in the way that people stand when the room has already recognized what they are. We apologize for the interruption. We'll be brief. Walsh had risen to her feet without fully realizing she'd done it. General Hartwell, I'm Dr. Miriam Walsh, chair of the hospital board. I wasn't aware. We weren't expected, he said simply. We became aware of a situation at this facility and felt that in-person contact was appropriate. He looked at the room again, the whole sweep of it, and then his gaze settled on Crane. He looked at Crane for a moment with the quality of someone completing a very quick assessment of a very simple problem. Then he turned to Sierra, and he saluted her. Clean, formal, precise, the kind of salute that is not a courtesy, but a statement. Carver and Reeves raised their hands simultaneously, and the 3 of them held it, and the room did not breathe. Sierra stood. She returned the salute with the muscle memory of someone for whom it had once been as natural as breathing, And in the 2 seconds it lasted, the entire history she had kept packed away for 3 years was visible to everyone in that room as clearly as if it had been written on the wall. Crane was staring. His attorney had stopped moving. Dr. Walsh had her hand at her mouth, not dramatically, just the involuntary gesture of a person whose understanding of a situation has just been restructured from the ground up. Hartwell lowered his hand. Major Quinn, he said, we wanted to come and say directly in whatever forum was necessary that the United States Marine Corps is aware of what occurred at this facility yesterday. And we are aware of who you are and what you have given, and we want that on record. He paused. In whatever room it needs to be on record in. The last sentence was not delivered to Sierra. It was delivered to the room. To Crane specifically, though, Hartwell never looked at him again after that first assessment. Sierra said, thank you, General. The Corps doesn't forget its people, Hartwell said, no matter what address they're working from. He nodded to Walsh. He nodded to the room. And then the three generals moved back toward the door with the same deliberate precision with which they had entered, and the door closed behind them, and the conference room at Pinarest Regional Medical Center was as quiet as any room any of them had ever been in. Crane's attorney spoke first. He leaned close and said something in Crane's ear very quietly. Crane did not respond. He was looking at the space where the generals had been standing, and his face had the specific quality of a man who had built a version of this morning in his head and was now holding it up against the version that had actually happened and finding that they had nothing in common. Dr. Walsh sat back down. She looked at Sierra with the full, undivided attention of someone who was seeing a person clearly for the first time. Ms. Quinn, she said, and her voice was different now. Not formal, not institutional, but genuine. I think we have significantly more to discuss than we had on the agenda. Sierra sat back down. She folded her hands on the table. She looked at the board chair of Pinarest Regional Medical Center with the same steady, patient expression she had worn through every moment of the last 24 hours. Yes, she said, I think we do. The conference room held its silence for exactly the length of time it took everyone in it to understand that the meeting they had planned was no longer the meeting they were in. Dr. Miriam Walsh was the first to recalibrate. She had been chair of the board for 6 years, had navigated physician contract disputes and budget crises, and one very public malpractice settlement that had nearly taken the hospital's accreditation with it, and she had learned in all of that time that the most dangerous thing a leader could do in a shifting situation was pretend the ground hadn't moved. She was not going to pretend. The ground had moved substantially. She looked at her attorneys. Give us the room, please. The two men exchanged a glance. One of them started to speak. Dr. Walsh, given the legal complexity of, I'll call you back in when I need you. Her voice was pleasant and final in equal measure. They left. Robert Ewan stayed. Sandra Cho stayed. Crane stayed, though the quality of his staying had changed. He was no longer at the head of anything. He was simply occupying a chair at the end of a table, which was a different thing entirely. Walsh turned her full attention to Sierra. I'd like you to tell me about your background, in whatever level of detail you're comfortable with. Sierra considered the request for a moment. Some of it is classified, she said. What I can tell you is that I served 2 tours with the Marine Corps in active combat zones with a specialization in field medicine. I led a forward surgical team. I received a medical discharge 3 years ago, completed civilian nursing certification, and came to work here. She paused. I didn't disclose my military background during the hiring process because it wasn't relevant to the clinical position and because I wanted to start somewhere that was just about the work. Walsh absorbed this. The commendations the general referenced, I'm not going to detail those, Sierra said, but they exist on record and General Hartwell's office can verify the relevant portions through proper channels if the board requires it. Walsh nodded slowly. She looked at Sierra the way you look at something you've walked past every day without truly seeing, with a slightly unsettled quality of revised understanding. The way you've conducted yourself since yesterday, she said, the documentation, the witness coordination, the HR process, that wasn't the response of someone who learned crisis management in a nursing program. No, Sierra said, it wasn't. Crane made a sound. It wasn't a word exactly. It was the sound of someone who has been sitting with something they need to release and can't find a way to do it that doesn't make everything worse. Everyone looked at him. He was staring at the table. I didn't know, he said. The room waited. Who she was. I didn't know. He said it as if it were relevant, as if the question of who Sierra was had been the variable that governed whether what he had done was acceptable. Sierra looked at him for the first time since the generals had left. Her voice was even and unhurried. With respect, Mr. Crane, who I was, shouldn't have changed anything about what happened yesterday. I was a nurse on your staff. That's all the identity that should have been required. The sentence landed in the room and sat there, and nobody disagreed with it, and Crane looked back at the table. Walsh said, he's right about one thing. For the wrong reason. We need to talk about what happens now. She looked at Ewan. Robert, where are we with the board notification? I sent an emergency summary to all members last night after legal briefed me. We have 4 members who've responded requesting an emergency session. He paused. As of this morning, we have 6. Call a full session for tomorrow morning. Walsh turned back to Sierra. I want to be direct with you. The board will need to act formally on this incident. That process involves independent review, which means it will take the time it takes. What I can tell you right now, speaking personally as board chair, is that the footage is unambiguous. The documentation you have provided is thorough and professional, and the testimony of the military officers who were present this morning, whatever they may be asked to provide formally, carries significant institutional weight. I understand the process, Sierra said. I know you do. Walsh allowed herself a small, very genuine expression. Not quite a smile, but something in that direction. That's becoming increasingly apparent. She folded her hands. Is there anything you need from the board directly at this stage? Sierra thought for a moment. I want it on record that the staff who witnessed the incident and provided statements did so voluntarily and professionally, and that there is no retaliation, formal or informal, against any of them. Marcus Webb, Dana Reyes, Gloria Chen, Raymond Park. Their names are in the HR file. She paused. They did the right thing in a difficult position. That should be noted. Walsh looked at Sandra Cho, who was already writing. Noted. And I want to go back downstairs, Sierra said. My department needs me. Walsh blinked. You want to right now? Yes, Sierra stood. If there's nothing further that requires my presence here, I'd like to go back to work. The meeting concluded without fanfare. Sierra rode the elevator back to the first floor, and when the doors opened, she stepped back into the controlled noise and motion of the ER with the same body language she carried into it every morning, present, settled, ready. Raymond Park looked up when she came through and tilted his head in the silent question of someone who had worked with her long enough to read her without words. She gave him a single nod that meant handled, and he handed her back the chart she'd left with him, and they both moved on without a word. Dana intercepted her at the medication station within 4 minutes. What happened up there? She asked, low and urgent. Gloria said she saw military people in the lobby, in uniform like actual generals, and then someone from admin came downstairs and said the conference room was cleared. 3 generals from the Marine Corps came to the hospital, Sierra said, checking the medication label with her usual precision. Dana stared. 3 generals. They came to speak to the board. She moved to the next chart. The board is convening an emergency session tomorrow. And Crane, Sierra set the chart down and looked at Dana squarely. That's not my decision to make. That's the board's process. My job right now is the patient in Bay 2 whose blood pressure has been trending in the wrong direction for the last hour and whose attending hasn't been called yet. She handed Dana the chart. Will you call Dr. Okafor? Dana took the chart. She held it and looked at Sierra for a beat longer than was necessary. Someday, she said, you're going to have to sit down and tell me everything. Sierra almost smiled. Maybe, she said. Call Okafor. What happened next in the hours that followed was the particular phenomenon that occurs when a closed system is exposed to outside pressure. Everything that had been quietly intentioned began to move. By 1 in the afternoon, the story of the general's appearance in the hospital lobby had traveled every floor in the building, gathering detail and momentum, the way stories do, so that by the time it reached the orthopedic ward on the 4th floor, it included details that no one present had actually witnessed, but that everyone had decided were probably true. By 2 o'clock, a local news outlet had a photographer outside the main entrance, though there was nothing to photograph yet. By 2:30, at least 3 board members had called Sandra Cho's direct line asking for additional information about the military officers. On the 6th floor, the tone had shifted in ways that were invisible from below, but were felt keenly by anyone operating in the administrative wing. Crane's assistant was routing calls with the particular efficiency of someone whose primary job had become containment. Crane himself had not left his office since returning from the conference room. His attorneys were with him. The conversations behind that closed door had the muffled, tightly compressed quality of arguments being conducted in a register designed not to carry. Robert Ewan, who had been at Pine Arrest for 9 years and who had survived more institutional turbulence than most people remembered, walked past that office 3 times between noon and 3 o'clock, and each time the sound behind the door was slightly different. First urgent, then a different kind of urgent, and finally something that was closer to quiet. The quiet that follows not resolution, but exhaustion. The quiet of people who have run out of new arguments and are reviewing the same facts for the 4th time, hoping they'll add up differently. At 3:15, Crane's lead attorney walked out of the office, went to the executive floor bathroom, stood at the sink for 90 seconds, and then walked back in. Robert Ewan, who noticed this, did not need to be told what it meant. He went back to his desk and began drafting a board summary that he had technically not yet been asked to write, but that he knew with the certainty of a man who had watched institutions move for a long time would be needed by morning. In the ER, Marcus Webb arrived for his 3 o'clock and found the Sierra in the middle of a pediatric case, a 7-year-old with a suspected fracture and a terrified mother who needed as much attention as the child. He watched from the hallway as Sierra talked to both of them, the child and the mother, simultaneously holding the child's attention with a calm, easy manner that didn't talk down to him, while threading in information and reassurance to the mother with the other half of her attention. It was one of the most technically demanding kinds of bedside care, managing 2 patients with completely different emotional needs in the same space, and she did it without apparent effort. When she came out of the bay, she looked at him and said, "How was rounds?" "Fine." He fell into step beside her. "Quinn, can I ask you something?" "Probably." He organized himself for a second. "The generals this morning, the ones in the lobby that everyone's talking about, were they here for you?" She glanced at him sideways. "Yes." "Because of what happened yesterday with Crane?" "Partly. There were other reasons." She stopped at the workstation and picked up the next chart. "Marcus, what's your question specifically?" He took a breath. "Who were you before you came here? Because whatever the answer is, it's changing the way this whole building sees you, and I've been watching people recalibrate all day, and I think I'd rather hear it from you than from the third-hand version that's going around." Sierra set the chart down. She looked at him for a moment with the quiet deliberateness of someone deciding how much of a door to open. "I was a Marine Corps officer," she said. "Combat veteran, 2 tours field surgical team commander. I was medically discharged 3 years ago, and I came here because I wanted to keep doing the part of the work that mattered most to me, which was taking care of people in the hardest moments of their lives." She picked the chart back up. "The rest of it, the rank, the deployments, the specifics, most of it is classified, and the parts that aren't classified are also not mine to broadcast." She paused. "Does that answer your question?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "You led a surgical team in combat." "Yes. That's why your hands are steady." It wasn't quite a question. She looked at him. "That's part of it." He nodded, slowly, processing it the way young people process the moments when the world reveals itself to be larger and more complicated than their current frame can hold. "Okay," he said, and then with the pragmatic efficiency she had been quietly fostering in him for months, "What's in Bay 5? 63-year-old male, abdominal pain, elevated white count, CT, ordered but not back yet. I want your read on the physical exam before the images arrive." "Let's go," he said, and they went. The afternoon passed the way the afternoon passes when the work is real and the people doing it are in it fully, one thing at a time, which is the only way serious work ever gets done. Donna handled a difficult family situation in Bay 8 with a composure that made Sierra stop for a brief moment and watch, noting the growth with the specific attention of someone who has been watching for it. Raymond Park ran the desk with the settled authority of a man who has done hard things for a long time and has stopped needing to announce it. The team moved around each other with the fluid efficiency of people who know each other's rhythms, and the ER did what ERs do, which is absorb everything the world brings to its doors and try to send people home better than they arrived. At 4:47, Sarah's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. It was a number she recognized from the morning briefing one of the security contacts General Hartwell's team had provided. She stepped into the hallway near the staff entrance and answered. "Quinn." The voice was not Hartwell's. It was younger, with the clipped cadence of someone accustomed to delivering information efficiently. "We have an update on the classified access situation. The individual who accessed the protocol file has been identified. This is not a hostile state actor. It's a domestic party, and the connection to your facility is indirect, but real." Sierra's hand tightened on the phone. "Define indirect." "And the individual works for a private defense contracting firm with a subsidiary that provides consulting services to hospital systems, including, as of 14 months ago, Pinterest Regional." The hallway was quiet. Sierra stood very still. "Are you telling me the breach and the hospital are connected?" "We're telling you the overlap exists. We're not prepared to define it as causal yet. Our counterintelligence team is working the connection." A pause. "We wanted you to know because you're on site and because depending on what we find in the next 24 to 48 hours, we may need your cooperation in a way that goes beyond awareness." "What kind of cooperation?" "Staying in place, being visible, not doing anything that signals to anyone inside that building that anything has changed in how you're operating." "I can do that." "We know you can." There was something in the voice then, not quite warmth, but the military equivalent of it. The specific frequency of respect between people who have been through things that created a common language. "You've been doing it for 3 years. The call ended. Sierra stood in the hallway for a moment. She looked at the door that led back to the ER. She thought about the defense contractor subsidiary. She thought about 14 months ago, trying to remember what had changed at the hospital around that time. In administrative restructuring, she recalled new vendor contracts, new software systems, a consulting firm brought in to streamline supply chain management. She had paid minimal attention to it at the time because it hadn't touched clinical operations directly. She paid attention now. She went back through the door and back to work, and nobody watching her could have detected any difference in how she moved or where she looked or how she held herself, because there was none. Because she was very good at carrying things that were heavy without letting the weight show in her posture. She had been trained for exactly that in places that had required exactly that, and the training had become the person. At 5:30, Crane's attorneys issued a formal statement through the hospital's communications office. Sierra heard about it from Dana, who had it on her phone within minutes of the release. It was brief and carefully worded, expressing that Mr. Crane acknowledged the incident and was cooperating fully with the board's review process, and that he had placed himself on administrative leave pending the outcome of that review. Administrative leave, self-imposed, the statement said, which was the legal phrasing for what happened when someone is asked to step back before they are formally pushed. Dana read it aloud quietly, standing next to Sierra at the station. When she finished, she looked up. "He's gone. For now," Sierra said. "Do you think he'll come back?" Sierra looked at the board above the station, the constant scroll of patient statuses and priority. "I think that's a question for the board," she said, "and I think the board has a clearer picture of the situation than they did 48 hours ago. Because of the generals. Because of the footage," Sierra said. "The generals just made it harder for anyone to minimize what the footage already showed." She picked up the next chart. The footage was always going to be enough. It just needed people willing to look at it without flinching. The evening shift transition brought Gloria Chen back in, and Gloria looked at Sierra when she arrived with an expression that contained a full conversation's worth of feeling compressed into about 2 seconds of eye contact. "I heard everything," Gloria said simply. "I figured you would." "The generals?" Gloria shook her head slowly. 30 years in nursing, honey. I have never seen anything like that." "It was necessary," Sierra said. "Was it you who called them, or did they just—" "They found me." Sierra began the handoff report. "They have a way of doing that." Gloria absorbed this with the specific equanimity of a woman who has processed enough of life's surprises to accept that some things simply are what they are. "All right," she said. "Give me the rundown." They went through the handoff with the professional thoroughness that both of them maintained, regardless of what else was happening, because that was what the work required, and the work did not pause for drama. When it was done and Sierra had gathered her things, Gloria put a hand briefly on her arm, just a touch, just a moment. "You doing all right, truly?" Sierra looked at her. Gloria was 61, had raised 4 children, while working nights, had held the hands of people dying alone in this ER more times than she would ever count, and had the eyes of someone who could read the answer to that question accurately, even when the answer being given was incomplete. Sierra decided in that moment to give her the complete one. "I'm tired," she said. "I'm more tired than I've let anyone see today. But I'm all right." Gloria nodded. "Good tired or bad tired? The kind that means something real happened." "Go home," Gloria said. "Sleep." Sierra walked out of the ER into the evening air, and the day hit her the way days sometimes do when you've held them at arm's length for their entire duration and finally set them down. Everything that had happened in the last 36 hours settled in her chest with a specific kind of weight. Not grief exactly and not fear, but something dense and complex that was made up of both and of other things that didn't have names she'd been given in any language. She sat in her car for 4 minutes before starting it. She thought about the contractor connection that the security contact had described. She thought about what it meant that the breach in the hospital might be linked, and she ran the possible shapes of that problem through the part of her mind that had been trained to think about threat structures, the way a clinician thinks about differential diagnosis, ruling things out systematically until what remained, however improbable, had to be taken seriously. She didn't have enough information yet to know what remained. She needed the next 24 hours to tell her more. She started the car. She drove through the city in the early evening, and the city moved around her with its ordinary life. People going home, people going out, people standing at bus stops and walking dogs and carrying grocery bags. And she loved it, genuinely, the way you love things that you have been in danger of losing and chose deliberately to return to. This ordinary life, this particular city, this specific emergency room with its specific people doing the specific hard and essential work of caring for strangers at their worst moments. She had left one world and built another, and now both worlds were in the same room, and she was going to have to find a way to be fully in each of them simultaneously, which was something she had spent 3 years trying to avoid. But avoidance had never been the thing that made her who she was. She had never been built for it. She had been built for the moment when the situation stops being manageable by any other means and someone has to walk toward it instead of away. And she had been doing that all her adult life in deserts and in operating rooms and in emergency departments. And she understood now with a clarity that felt almost peaceful that she was going to have to do it again. What she didn't know yet, what none of them knew, not Dana, not Marcus, not the board, not Crane sitting in whatever room he was sitting in tonight, reviewing the ruins of a week he had not seen coming, was that the next morning was going to bring with it a revelation that would change not just the dynamics at Pine Arrest Regional, but the shape of Sierra Quinn's life in ways she had been moving toward without knowing it for 3 full years. She pulled into her driveway. She went inside. She made tea and sat with it in the quiet of her kitchen, and she let herself feel the weight of everything just for a little while, just until the tea was gone. And then she set the cup down and she went to sleep. She woke at 4:41 without the alarm again. Some part of her had decided without being asked that sleep was finished and the day needed to begin. She lay still for exactly 30 seconds, running through what she knew and what she didn't and what the next 12 hours were likely to bring, and then she got up and made coffee and stood at her kitchen window while the city outside was still deciding whether it was night or morning. The board session was at 9. The security contact had said 48 hours for more information on the contractor connection, which meant something could arrive today. Crane was on administrative leave, which meant the department would be operating without executive interference, which was in some ways easier and in other ways more exposed, the kind of quiet before a reorganization that could go in any direction, depending on who moved first and with what intention. She had thought about all of this the night before, and she had made the decision she always made when facing a complex situation with multiple moving parts. She would do the next right thing in front of her, and she would trust that the preparation she had already done was sufficient. She arrived at the hospital at 6:40. Not for her shift didn't start until 7, but because she wanted 20 minutes in the department before it began. She wanted to read the room feel what the overnight had left, check on the patients she'd handed off to Gloria the evening before. The ER at 6:40 in the morning had a specific quality that she valued: tired but not broken. The overnight staff in their last hour of the department holding its shape through the force of professional habit, even when everyone in it was running on diminished fuel. Gloria was at the station when she walked in finishing notes. She looked up. "You're early. How was overnight?" "Manageable. Bay 3 went upstairs at 2. Gloria closed her notes. "Sierra, I want to tell you something before the shift changes and it gets loud." Sierra stopped. "Tell me." "3 of the overnight staff came to me last night and asked how you were doing." Gloria said it simply. Not gossiping, not curious, genuinely asking the way you ask about someone you're worried about. "Marco from transport. Jenny at registration. Young Dr. Patel from the overnight resident team." She paused. "This department cares about you. I don't know if anyone said that to you plainly, so I'm saying it." As Sierra stood with that for a moment, it was the kind of thing that was hard to receive if you weren't practiced at it, and she was not practiced at it. She had spent 3 years being the person other people leaned on and had constructed the arrangement carefully because leaning was safer than being leaned on if you had things you needed to keep upright inside yourself. But Gloria was looking at her with 61 years of seeing people clearly, and there was no graceful way to deflect it. "Thank you," Sierra said, and she meant it in a way that went deeper than the 2 words could carry, and Gloria heard that and nodded and went back to her notes. The shift began. Donna arrived at 7:03 and immediately began the kind of purposeful, focused work that told Sierra she had come in early and ready, which meant she had been thinking about this day since before it started. Marcus arrived at 7:15 for his morning rounds check-in and looked at Sierra the way a resident looks at an attending when they've decided to follow their example regardless of the personal cost committed without fanfare. Raymond Park was already at the desk. The team was assembled and the work began. At 8:20, Sierra's security contact called. She stepped into the hallway. "Quinn," he said, "we have the contractor connection confirmed. I need to give you this quickly because it's going to become relevant to the board session this morning." He took a breath. "The firm that accessed the classified protocol is called Meridian Strategic Group. Their hospital consulting subsidiary called Meridian Health Partners signed a contract with Pine Arrest Regional 14 months ago. The consulting engagement was framed as operational efficiency review. What it actually involved was embedding a data analyst with access to hospital administrative systems vendor records and through an improperly configured network integration portions of the hospital's medical research server." Sierra pressed her back against the wall. "Who authorized the contract?" "Elliot Crane." The hallway was very still. She breathed through it once. "Does Crane know what Meridian actually is?" "We don't believe he knew the full scope. Our current assessment is that he was recruited by Meridian as a contractual client without being told about their defense intelligence operations. He was useful to them for access, not for knowledge, but the contact paused. The contract contained terms that gave Meridian Health Partners unusually broad data access, and a competent executive reviewing those terms should have caught that. Whether he didn't read it carefully or was persuaded to overlook it, we're still working that question. What does this mean for the hospital? It means the board needs to be informed this morning that there is an active federal counterintelligence matter connected to an administrative contract signed under Crane's authority. We will be sending a formal liaison from our office to the board session. They should be arriving at the hospital by 8:50. I'll make sure Dr. Walsh is notified before the session opens, Sierra said. Quinn, his voice shifted. I want you to know that your cooperation in this has been the way you've handled everything since we contacted you has been exactly what we needed. Staying in place, staying visible, not tipping your hand. That took discipline. It wasn't discipline, she said. It was just work. That's all it's ever been. She hung up and called Dr. Walsh's cell number, which Walsh had given her the day before with the instruction to use it if anything relevant developed. Walsh picked up on the second ring. Quinn, there's a federal development you need to know about before the board session. Can you come in early? A pause of about 2 seconds. I'm 15 minutes out. I'll come straight to the conference room. Sierra told her what she knew in the elevator on Walsh's way up over the phone concisely and in order, and by the time Walsh arrived at the 6th floor, she had already absorbed it and was moving in the direction of it rather than away from it, which was the quality that made her effective at the level she was operating at. They met in the conference room at 8:40. Sierra, still in scrubs, Walsh, in the clothes she would have worn to the board session, and Sierra walked her through the contractor connection with the same structured clarity she brought to clinical briefings, facts, first implications, second, open questions, clearly labeled as such. Walsh listened without interrupting. When Sierra finished, Walsh said, Crane authorized the contract. Yes. And this firm had access to hospital systems for 14 months. Yes. Walsh looked at the table. She had the expression of someone recalculating a large equation. Was any patient data accessed? The federal liaison will have more on scope when they arrive. My contact's current assessment is that the primary target was research server data related to my military background, but the access was broad enough that patient data exposure is a question that needs to be on the table. Walsh looked up. If there's patient data involved, this isn't just a board matter. This is HIPAA. This is OCR reporting. This is a public disclosure conversation. I know, Sierra said, which is why you need the federal liaison in the room before the board session opens. Not after. Walsh nodded. She picked up her phone and called her assistant and said in the measured voice of a person holding something large, push the board session to 10:30. Clear the conference room for a federal briefing at 9 and find Robert Ewan. The federal liaison arrived at 8:56. He was a man named Agent Calloway, mid-40s, who carried credentials from a division of federal law enforcement that had a long title and a short effective explanation. He investigated breaches of classified information with civilian system exposure. He briefed Walsh and Robert Ewan in 42 minutes. Sierra sat in the briefing but did not speak except when asked a direct question, because this was his territory, and she'd understood the value of knowing when the role was to hold ground and when it was to step back and let the people with jurisdiction do their work. When Calloway finished, Walsh sat very still for a moment. Then she said, What do you need from the hospital? Cooperation with our records review. Voluntary initially. We prefer to keep this out of a subpoena process if possible. You'll have it, Walsh said. She looked at Ewan. Pull everything connected to the Meridian Health Partners contract. Everything. Today. Ewan was already writing. At 10:30, the full board of Pinterest Regional Medical Center convened. Sierra was not in the room for the board session. She was in the ER where she belonged, managing the 11 o'clock chaos that had built while she'd been upstairs. But she heard afterward from Walsh directly what had happened in that room. She heard it in the way that significant things are sometimes reported plainly, without performance of the facts carrying themselves. The board voted on 2 motions. The first was the termination of Elliot Crane's contract as CEO of Pinterest Regional Medical Center, effective immediately with cause. The vote was unanimous. The second motion was the appointment of Robert Ewan as interim CEO, pending a formal executive search with a specific directive that the search process include meaningful consultation with department staff, including nursing leadership. That vote was also unanimous. The session lasted 1 hour and 17 minutes, which for a board action of that magnitude was remarkably brief, and the briefness said everything about how clearly the ground had been prepared. Walsh called Sierra at 12:43. It's done, she said. Sierra was at the nursing station between patients. I heard about the vote. I wanted you to hear it from me. Walsh paused. There's something else. The board passed a third motion, and I want to explain it rather than let you hear it from someone else. Another pause, and in it, Sierra heard the particular weight of something being said carefully because it mattered. We are formally recommending an internal review of the hospital's nursing leadership structure with a recommendation to establish a chief nursing officer position at the executive level. That position did not exist before today. A beat. Your name is the first one the board wants considered. The nursing station was busy around Sierra. Someone called her name from Bay 4. A monitor somewhere beeped its particular specific urgency. The ER moved in its constant, essential way. She said, "I appreciate that. You don't have to decide anything today," Walshurk said, "but I want you to know what you have earned. Not what happened to you, what you have built in this department over 3 years before any of this week occurred. The board looked at your record this morning, your clinical metrics, your patient outcomes, your training of junior staff. Dr. Okafor spoke about you for 4 minutes without being asked to. That is not a small thing." Sierra was quiet for a moment. "Give me some time. As much as you need, Trinaine." She hung up and stood at the station for exactly 3 seconds. Then she went to Bay 4. Dana found her at 2 o'clock, and from Dana's expression, Sierra could see that the news had traveled not the classified elements those were contained, but the board vote Crane's termination, the CNO proposal. Dana stood in front of her with the look of someone who has just received information that is simultaneously surprising and completely inevitable, the way news sometimes lands when it confirms what you had always half known. "They offered you CNO, Dana said. "No, they're considering it." Sierra. Dana's voice had a quality in it that Sierra had not heard from her before, not the careful deference of a colleague managing the dynamic of their different seniorities, but something straighter and more personal. "I've been working next to you for 2 years. I have watched you run this department through short staffing and equipment failures and every kind of crisis this place produces, and I have watched you do it while teaching the rest of us how to be better without ever calling it teaching." She stopped, steadied herself. "You were built for more than what they've been giving you. And I say that not because of the military thing, I say it because of every shift I have watched you work." Sierra looked at her. Dana Reyes, 33 years old, 2 years at Penarest, second best instincts on the floor behind Sierra's own. She had grown in those 2 years in ways that were measurable and ways that weren't, and that Sierra had been watching both kinds of growth with the attention she gave to everything that mattered. "You know what I said to you the morning all of this started," Sierra said. Dana thought for a second. "You said you were the nurse on shift, that was what mattered." "It was true then," Sierra said. "It's still true. Whatever role I'm in, whatever title is on the board above my name, the work is the thing. The patients are the thing. The people standing next to me doing the work are the thing." She held Dana's gaze. "You're ready for more responsibility than you're carrying. I want you to know I've been saying that in my performance notes for the last 8 months." Dana blinked. You have the instincts and the endurance and the emotional intelligence. What you've been missing is someone telling you clearly that you have them." Sierra turned back to the station. "Consider yourself told." Dana stood there for a moment, visibly reordering something inside herself. Then she picked up the next chart and went to work. Marcus appeared at her elbow at 3:15 between his afternoon cases. "Quinn." He was slightly out of breath, which meant he'd heard and had been waiting for a moment to get to her. "The vote and the CNO thing, the whole building is talking." "I know. Are you going to take it?" She considered him for a moment. Marcus Webb, 4 months into his residency, already asking the questions that mattered instead of the safe ones. Already standing on the right side of hard situations without being asked to. Already the kind of physician she had come to believe in when she watched him work in the specific and private way she tracked potential in people, the same way she tracked clinical trends quietly, rigorously over time. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "For what it's worth," he said, "this department is different because of you. I've done rotations in 3 other hospitals. I know what a department looks like when the person at the center of it is just doing a job, and I know what it looks like when the person at the center actually believes in it." He paused. "This place believes in something. That came from somewhere." She looked at him. He was earnest without being naive, which was the harder thing to be and the more valuable. "Get back to your patient," she said. "Yes, ma'am." He went. At 4 o'clock, Agent Calloway called her. "We've completed the initial records review with hospital administration's cooperation. Patient data exposure is limited. The access logs indicate Meridian's focus was almost entirely on the research server partition. We're in early stages, but the indications are that the medical record system was not the primary target." He paused. "I want to give you that directly since you were the one who flagged the question. What happens to Meridian now? That's above my level to say on record. But I can tell you that the file on them has become significantly heavier in the last 24 hours, and that tends to indicate a trajectory." and the breach of the classified protocol being handled at a level above this office. You'll receive notification through the secure contact General Hartwell's team established. He paused again, and the pause had a human quality. Ms. Quinn, Major Quinn, I've done this work for 16 years. The way you manage yourself through the last 48 hours while maintaining full clinical duties, while cooperating with a federal matter, while navigating an institutional crisis, I've worked with trained intelligence professionals who couldn't have done it cleaner. I just want you to know that. I had good training, she said simply. You also had good character. Those aren't the same thing. She thanked him and ended the call and stood in the quiet of the staff corridor for a moment, and she thought about character, what it was, where it came from, whether it was the thing you were given or the thing you chose. And she thought that the honest answer was probably both, that you were given certain materials and then you decided every day what to build with them, and the building was the work and the work never stopped. She went back to the floor. At 5:15, Robert Ewan came down to the ER. He didn't call ahead, didn't send his assistant. He came himself in his jacket, and he stood at the entrance to the department for a moment before Dana noticed him and came to get Sierra. Sierra walked over and met him at the entrance, and they stood there with the noise of the department behind them. I wanted to come down rather than call, he said. I'm going to be running this place on an interim basis, and I want to be clear from the beginning that my approach is going to be different from my predecessors. He said predecessor with the careful neutrality of someone who has made a decision about language. I'm going to be asking department heads and senior staff for direct input on operational decisions. I'm going to be spending time on the floor rather than only in the administrative wing. He met her eyes. And I want to acknowledge directly that what happened in this department on Tuesday morning should never have been possible in a well-run institution. I can't undo it, but I can make sure the culture that allowed someone to think it was acceptable was not the culture this hospital operates on going forward. Sierra looked at him steadily. That's not a small thing to commit to. I know, he said, but it's the right thing. He extended his hand. I'd like to work with you, Major Quinn, in whatever capacity you decide to take. She shook it. One condition. Name it. Down here it's just Quinn. No rank, no major. The ER doesn't need rank, it needs people who show up and do the work. Ewan almost smiled. Quinn it is. He left. Sierra turned back to her department, and the department received her back the way it always did, immediately, without ceremony, with the next thing that needed doing already waiting. The evening shift transition at 6:30 brought Gloria back, and the handoff report Sierra gave her was the most complete one she had ever written. Not longer exactly, but denser, more alive. Every patient fully represented, every outstanding question flagged, every colleague's contribution noted by name. Gloria read through it and then looked up at Sierra with an expression that contained everything and said only, "Go home." Going, Sierra said. She went back for her things, and as she was putting on her jacket, Dana appeared one more time. She was holding something, a folded piece of paper, which she pressed into Sierra's hand. From the overnight staff, she said. They passed it around this morning. Everyone signed it. Sierra unfolded it. It was a single sheet of hospital notepaper with 41 signatures on it, and at the top, in Dana's handwriting, it said, "We see you, we're with you, we're not going anywhere." She stood in the staff locker room and looked at it for a long moment. 41 signatures, transport staff and registration staff and nurses and residents, and one attending Dr. Okafor, whose signature was at the bottom in the large confident script of a man who meant things when he wrote them. 41 people in a mid-sized hospital in a mid-sized city who had watched a woman absorb something that should have broken her and had decided collectively that they were on her side, not because of what they'd learned about her past, not because of the generals or the board vote or any of the drama that had reshaped their institution in 48 hours, but because of what they had seen with their own eyes over months and years, the steady presence, the quiet competence, the way she looked at every person who came through that door as if their life mattered specifically, not abstractly. She folded the paper and put it in her jacket pocket. She carried it out of the building and into the evening air. She sat in her car and she let the last 2 days move through her, fully all of it, the slap and the stillness, the generals in the conference room, the federal briefing and the board vote, the security breach and the contractor connection, the faces of Dana and Marcus and Gloria and Raymond, and 41 names on a piece of notepaper. She let it all be real, fully real, without holding any of it at arm's length. And what she found when she let herself feel the full weight of it was not exhaustion. It was not the relief of something ending. It was the particular grounded sense of arrival that comes when you have been moving towards something for a long time without knowing its name, and you finally stand in front of it and recognize it. This was her life. This specific one in this specific city, in this specific building, full of specific people who needed care and gave it and built something together out of the daily unglamorous, essential act of showing up. She had left one world and built another, and she had been afraid somewhere underneath everything that the first world would eventually pull the second one apart. But it hadn't. It had revealed it. It had shown everyone in that building what had always been standing in front of them, not a quiet nurse, not a hidden soldier, not a problem to manage or a resource to deploy. A woman who had decided with everything she was to give her best to the people in front of her every single day, regardless of what it cost, regardless of what she carried, regardless of whether anyone saw it or named it or gave it the credit it was owed. They saw it now, every one of them. And what they had done with that, seeing the statements, the signatures, the testimony, the presence, that was not something Sierra Quinn had manufactured. That was something she had earned shift by shift and patient by patient and year by year. And the only way that things worth having are ever truly earned by doing the work, telling the truth and refusing at every moment that tested the commitment to be anything less than exactly who she was. Elliot Crane had walked into her emergency room and struck her across the face in front of 30 witnesses, expecting to reduce her to something smaller than she was. He had not reduced her. He had simply shown everyone in that room what she was made of, and what she was made of was the kind of thing that does not diminish under pressure, it clarifies. It becomes more itself. It stands straighter. Major Sierra Quinn started her car. She drove home through the evening city, and the city moved around her with its full and ordinary life, and she was part of it, all of it, the hard parts and the beautiful parts, the parts that required everything she had, and the parts that gave back more than she expected. She was part of all of it, and she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not despite everything she had survived. Because of it, she was home.